Okay, so ready to dive into something really fascinating. Today we're exploring what holds us back from actually doing the things we know we want to do. You know that feeling, right?
Absolutely. And how to bridge that gap. I
Mm,
think everyone listening has felt that at some point.
right. We're using this book, The 5 Second Rule. It's all about finding a technique to actually make things happen in your life,
Mhm.
at work, in your relationships, all of it.
It's amazing how much it focuses on just being able to take action, quickly and effectively
Yeah.
without feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's almost like a cheat sheet to get to those big aha moments that can really change things.
Totally. The core idea in the 5 second rule is really about moving from thinking to doing.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today, why this rule seems to resonate with so many people, why it works, and how you can use it right now in your own life.
So to kick things off, the book talks about courage in a way that's really relatable. It's not about, being some sort of superhero. It's about those little everyday moments.
Right. Not like jumping out of airplanes, more like speaking up in a meeting
Yeah.
or finally starting that project you've been putting off.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that research suggests courage is something we develop, not something we're just born with.
It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah.
Each time you push through that hesitation, you're basically doing a courage curl.
Love that. So if we all have this potential for courage, why do we find ourselves hesitating so often? Well, our brains are designed to protect us, right?
Yeah, we're kind of wired to avoid anything that feels risky or unfamiliar.
Our brain is always on the lookout for threats, for uncertainty, for anything new that could potentially harm us. It's a survival thing.
So change, which often requires stepping into the unknown, kind of triggers this internal alarm system.
Right, and that's where that hesitation comes from, this feeling of, oh, I don't know about this, even if we logically know it's a good thing.
So there's this internal battle, this tug of war. You want to make a change, but your brain's like, wait a minute, hold on.
Makes sense. Now, how did this 5 second rule even come about? The author shares a really interesting story about her own experience.
Yeah, there was a point where I felt totally stuck, honestly, paralyzed by my circumstances. And I was flipping through channels on TV one night and saw a rocket launch.
Oh, right. I remember this from the book. It had this dramatic countdown, didn't it?
Yes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then liftoff. It was such a powerful image, and something just clicked. I had this very clear thought, like, I'm going to launch myself out of bed like that rocket tomorrow.
Wow.
I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, right? But I decided to actually listen to that impulse.
Which is what the book emphasizes, right? Honoring those instincts, even if they seem a little out there at first.
Absolutely. What's really cool is there's actually some neuroscience that supports this.
I was just about to say there's some amazing research from places like the University of Arizona, Cornell, and Duke. They've discovered that our brains are actually wired to help us achieve our goals.
Yeah, and when we set a goal, it's like our brain creates this mental checklist, a task list. And whenever we encounter something related to that goal, our brains kind of nudge us to act.
Exactly. It's almost subconscious. So let's say your goal is to get healthier. You walk past a gym, and suddenly that part of your brain involved in making decisions, the prefrontal cortex, starts firing up.
You get that little urge to go in.
Right. It's like your instincts are reminding you of what you want to achieve. It's really fascinating.
And that's kind of what happened with the rocket launch. It was like my brain was saying, hey, remember you want to make a change? Here's a reminder. It was my subconscious self breaking through.
And those instincts, they can lead to incredible things. The book shares so many cool examples. Like, think about John Walker, who discovered the first friction match by accident in 1826.
Just messing around with chemicals, and bam, he followed that instinct to create something new.
Or George de Mestral, the inventor of Velcro. He noticed how those little burrs stuck to his dog's fur, and boom, an idea was born.
Those moments where you're just like, that's interesting, I wonder. Those are golden.
Exactly. Like Art Fry and the Post-it note. He just needed a better bookmark for his hymnal and ended up revolutionizing the way we leave notes.
And my favorite example, the Frappuccino. It all started with the Starbucks assistant manager in Santa Monica. They were having a slow day because it was so hot, no one wanted hot coffee. And he just had this thought, what if we made a frozen coffee drink? The rest is history.
These stories all have one thing in common. Those individuals honored their instincts. They bet on themselves. They said, I'm going to explore this, even if it seems a bit crazy. That's where innovation comes from.
Now, we've talked about the prefrontal cortex a bit. The book dives into how it helps us take deliberate action and how the 5 second rule can help us activate that part of our brain.
Exactly. It's like a shortcut to engaging our ability to focus and make decisions.
Especially when it comes to starting new habits.
Right. The book gets into some of the later research too, stuff like basal ganglia. Those are involved in habit formation. And the concept of activation energy, like the mental push we need to actually start doing something.
Which is why the 5-second rule is so helpful. It provides that little burst of energy.
Exactly. It helps us break free from those old patterns. But it's not just about starting new things. The 5-second rule can also be a really powerful tool for dealing with negative thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. The book's co-author, Chris, shares how he used it to shift his focus away from dwelling on past business failures. He used that 5-second countdown to consciously direct his energy toward the things that had actually gone well.
It's like choosing where you want to put your mental energy.
Exactly. You're not denying the negative stuff, you're just making a choice about where to focus your attention.
Right. Now, you know how the 5-second rule was first introduced to the world?
Yeah, it's a pretty funny story. It was almost an afterthought.
It was. Just a quick mention at the end of a TEDx talk back in 2011.
The talk was called How to Stop Screwing Yourself Over. And at the very end, she's like, oh, and by the way, try this 5-second rule.
And it just took off. People everywhere started sharing their experiences, how this simple technique was actually working for them.
Yeah, it was amazing to see. And that led to a much deeper dive into the science behind it, why it seemed to resonate with so many people. And the book really gets into this idea that there's a reason why change can feel so hard for us.
Neurologically speaking, our minds are constantly trying to protect us. And that often leads to overthinking.
We tend to come up with all these reasons why we shouldn't do something, especially if it involves uncertainty or stepping outside our comfort zones.
Right, because for our ancient ancestors, that kind of hesitation could have meant the difference between life and death.
So we have to be quicker than our brains. Act before that wave of doubt washes over us.
That's where those 5 seconds can make all the difference.
The book actually uses the example of Rosa Parks on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It's such a powerful moment in history. And it wasn't planned, right? It was an instinctive reaction. She didn't have time to overthink it. And that's what made it so impactful.
And the book contrasts this with Martin Luther King Jr., who was asked to lead the bus boycott just a few days later. He admitted that if he'd had more time to think about it, he might have said no.
It's crazy to think about, right? The weight of that decision.
It really shows that courage often happens in those split-second decisions, not necessarily in those big, planned-out moments.
And the book then brings it down to earth with all these relatable situations where we need a bit of courage, those everyday things that we might hesitate about.
Like a sales team feeling totally deflated after their sales targets get raised, or Alice over in England struggling to get herself out for a run even though she knows it's good for her.
Or someone named Patel wanting to reach out to a grieving friend but feeling awkward about what to say. We've all been there.
Totally. Or Sai in China. She's terrified to make cold calls for her new business. And Todd in Australia, he wants to change his major, but he's scared to tell his parents.
And then there's Mark. He really wants to connect with his wife again, but the emotional distance feels so huge.
Those are all situations where that 5-second rule can come in handy.
Big time. It's about overcoming that inertia and remembering that often the regret we feel comes from not trying, not from failing.
Like Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
My daughter, Kendall, actually went through this. She's a really talented singer, but she was hesitant to audition for this big musical in New York. Not because she was afraid of the audition itself, but because of what might happen if she didn't get the part.
That fear of sucking.
Yeah. She wanted to hold on to this idea that she was amazing, but she was too scared to risk failing. She'd rather just say, oh, I could have done it, I just chose not to. It's a way to protect our egos.
But the book offers this great response to that. It's like, so what? So what if you don't get the part? The point is you tried. That's where growth happens.
And the book also talks about those moments when we're just consumed by worry. You can't always prevent a worry from popping up, but you can prevent it from taking over.
Right. It's about shifting your focus, bringing yourself back to the present moment. That's where you can actually do something.
And history is full of examples of people who overcame their own resistance to achieve incredible things, like Michelangelo. He initially refused to paint the Sistine Chapel.
Can you imagine?
I know, right? But he felt totally overwhelmed. The Pope had to basically beg him to do it.
And even Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, was scared to quit his job at HP to start a new company. He needed his friends and family to push him.
Makes you think about all the things that never happen because people let fear hold them back. What if they had just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 themselves into action?
The book asks that question directly. What are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the perfect moment, for more confidence, for permission from someone else? That could be a long wait.
And waiting isn't passive. It's often an active choice. You're convincing yourself that now's not the right time. But think about the things people regret. Missed opportunities, relationships that could have been saved.
And then you have these incredible success stories that came from taking action. 50 Shades of Grey was self-published. Ed Sheeran built his career by busking, playing in parks without even a permit.
And Broad City, that whole show started with a couple of friends making funny videos on YouTube. It's amazing what can happen when you just start.
It's the courage to take that first step and the discipline to keep going. The 5-second rule helps us bridge that gap between wanting to do something and actually doing it.
It comes down to a choice. Are you going to let your fears make the decisions? Or are you going to listen to your heart?
The book revisits the example of Tom, who's at a bar and sees someone he wants to talk to. And it comes down to this: do what must be done. Like Rosa Parks, you just do it.
It's about trusting that inner voice.
And even that one decision to act can quiet those nagging doubts, those voices in your head that say you can't do it.
We often get so caught up in wanting guarantees, wanting to know for sure that we'll succeed. But that's not how life works. Achieving your goals is often about taking lots of shots. Not everyone will go in.
The book is full of examples of this. People who had tons of failures before they found success. Rovio, the company that makes Angry Birds, they had 51 unsuccessful games before they hit it big.
Mark Ruffalo, the actor, went to something like 600 auditions before he got a decent role. Even Babe Ruth, the home run king, he also holds the record for strikeouts.
It's about getting comfortable with that process.
Yeah.
The starting, the failing, the getting back up and trying again.
That's where the real growth happens.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that really stood out to me in the book is how it talks about the role of feelings in our decision-making. It's actually pretty mind-blowing. It references research by this neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, who studied patients with brain damage that affected their emotional processing.
Oh, right. I remember this.
And he found that even when these patients could logically list the pros and cons of different options, they struggled to actually make decisions because they couldn't access their feelings. They were missing that gut instinct.
Because even a simple decision, like what to eat for dinner, is based on how we feel. We're not just thinking, oh, this is healthy, so I should eat it. We're also asking ourselves, what do I feel like having right now?
And that initial urge to get out of bed in the morning, to talk to that person across the room, that's all based on feeling too. It's our intuition trying to guide us.
But what the book emphasizes is that we have a choice. We can't always control how we feel, but we can control how we act.
Like athletes, right? They don't always feel like training, but they do it anyway.
Just do it, like the Nike slogan. It's about taking action even when those feelings of doubt or fear are present.
Everyone experiences those feelings. Even Lin-Manuel Miranda, the guy who wrote Hamilton, he tweeted about how he had to learn to balance pushing himself forward with being kind to himself. Everyone doubts themselves sometimes.
But action is the way through it. And the 5-second rule can be a great tool for this, especially when it comes to things like sharing new ideas. It helps you bypass those feelings of self-consciousness and just get it out there.
Speaking of getting things out there, the book has a lot to say about the importance of morning routines. Getting up when your alarm goes off instead of hitting snooze.
That's a big one. It sets the tone for the whole day.
It's like a little victory first thing in the morning. It can give you this feeling of control, like you're already winning.
A couple people in the book, Emma and Tracy, they talk about how that one change completely shifted their perspective.
It can have a ripple effect. And it ties into the 5-second rule because you're replacing a negative habit, hitting snooze, with a positive one. I still use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown to get myself out of bed every day.
Now, when it comes to health and fitness, the book is really straightforward. It's like, look, you're never going to feel like working out or eating a salad. You just have to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
It's about taking action before your brain has time to come up with excuses.
Totally. And there's some amazing stories in the book of people who've transformed their health by doing just that. Charlie, who lost a ton of weight, Alexandra and Peckinham, they made huge lifestyle changes by using the 5-second rule.
And then there's Alice, who used the rule to overcome some really serious challenges: anxiety, agoraphobia, all kinds of pressure.
And she completely turned her life around.
Yeah, it's really inspiring.
And the book doesn't shy away from talking about really tough stuff, like facing serious illness.
Right. Greg Cheek's story is incredible. He's running marathons with stage 3 cancer.
And then you have Amy Robach, the news anchor. She decided to have a mammogram live on Good Morning America after a doctor told her it could save lives.
These are people facing huge challenges, but they're using the 5-second rule to access that inner strength.
Absolutely. And it can even help with more everyday things like managing distractions.
Oh, yeah. My daughter, Kendall, actually decided to delete all her social media apps because she was spending way too much time on them. And it was like an instant relief.
It's about being intentional with your time and energy.
And the book talks about how important morning routines are for setting those intentions. Dan O'Reilly, who's a behavioral economist, he says our brains are actually the most productive in the first few hours after we wake up.
So it's a good time to tackle those bigger goals.
Exactly. Before the chaos of the day sets in. I like to keep my phone out of the bedroom, make the bed, have a cup of coffee, and just think about what I want to accomplish that day.
That's great. And a book also mentioned something interesting. Planning your quitting time.
Yeah, having a set time to stop working can actually make you more productive. It's called Parkinson's Law Work expands to fill the time allotted.
So if you don't set boundaries, you could end up working all night.
Which is not good for anyone.
Definitely not.
No.
The book also gets into the topic of procrastination. And it makes this really interesting distinction between what it calls destructive and productive procrastination.
I loved that part.
So destructive procrastination, that's the kind where you're just avoiding things that need to get done. But productive procrastination can actually be beneficial for creativity. It's about letting your mind wander, making unexpected connections.
I do that all the time when I'm writing. Sometimes you just need to step away from a project and let it simmer in the back of your mind.
Absolutely. But obviously we need to find ways to deal with the destructive kind of procrastination.
Right. The book shares a story about Scott, who had these really high expectations for himself, but he was constantly putting things off.
Yeah, and it talks about how self-forgiveness can be a key to breaking that cycle. Trishki, in the book, she learned that being kind to herself actually helped her overcome her procrastination.
Because a lot of times it's that fear of failure holding us back. Like Ryan, who wanted to start a business but was terrified to actually take the leap.
There's also some interesting research on the concept of our present self versus our future self. Dr. Peichel found that by picturing our future selves, the people we want to become, we can be more motivated to act now.
It's like giving yourself some objective advice.
Exactly. And that's why vision boards can be so effective, or even those digitally aged photos that show you what you'll look like when you're older. It helps us connect with our long-term goals.
The book shares a story about Andre, who used this technique to finally start writing a book. He imagined his future self, the one who had achieved his dream, and that helped him push through his excuses.
And one of the biggest benefits of using the 5-second rule, according to the book, is its ability to help us manage worry.
Which is something we all struggle with.
Totally. Worrying is often a learned behavior, something we picked up as kids. And the crazy thing is, most of the things we worry about never even happen.
The Legacy Project, this huge study of people in their later years, they found that one of the biggest regrets people have is spending so much time worrying.
They wish they had just enjoyed life more instead of letting worry steal their joy.
Totally. The book has a great tip for dealing with worry in the moment. Counting backwards from 5 can actually interrupt that thought pattern and bring you back to the present.
It's like a circuit breaker for your mind.
And the book suggests following that countdown with a couple of questions. What am I grateful for right now, and what do I want to remember about this moment? It's about shifting your focus to something positive.
And there's some neuroscience to back this up. Alex Korb, who's a neuroscientist, he says that feeling grateful can actually increase dopamine production in the brain.
Which is our feel-good chemical. So it's like you're literally rewiring your brain to focus on the positive.
For those who struggle with more intense anxiety, the book provides some really helpful explanations, like what happens during a panic attack. It uses this great analogy of a near miss when you're driving. Your body reacts first, right? Your heart races, you tense up, and then your mind tries to figure out why.
It's like, what just happened? But if there's no obvious explanation, your mind can start to spiral, making up all sorts of scary scenarios.
And that's how panic can take hold.
The book also has this really cool technique for reframing fear as excitement.
Because physiologically, those two emotions are very similar, right?
Yeah.
Your heart beats faster, your breathing changes.
Yeah, but it's our interpretation that makes the difference. Quinn, who's in the book, he learned to do this as a kid. He used to be terrified of sleepovers. So he started telling himself that his racing heart meant he was excited, not scared.
I love that. And the book also talks about using what it calls anchoring thoughts.
Oh yeah, this is a great one. It's about using the 5-second rule to interrupt a negative thought pattern and replace it with a positive image.
Right. So if you're scared of flying, for example, you could use those 5 seconds to visualize yourself arriving at your destination, enjoying your vacation, or whatever positive outcome you're looking forward to.
I used to be terrified of flying, superstitious, all that, but I started using this technique and it really helped.
So powerful. There's a story in the book about Fran who used this on a flight and completely overcame her fear.
It's amazing how our thoughts can literally change our physical experience.
And those anchoring thoughts can also help in other situations, like conversations. If you're feeling nervous, you can use that 5-second countdown to center yourself and focus on what you want to communicate.
It's about building that confidence.
And that's something the book talks about a lot. Confidence isn't something you're born with. It's a choice. It's about believing in yourself and your ideas.
There's an example in the book about this shy colleague who has great ideas but never speaks up.
Classic scenario.
And it talks about how important it is to encourage those people to share their voices. I used to do this exercise at Cisco Systems where I'd challenge people to use the 5-second rule to introduce themselves to someone they didn't know.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and the feedback I got was incredible. People like Trace and Crystal, they told me how it helped them overcome their shyness and actually connect with others.
You know, you don't need to be the loudest person in the room to be confident. It's about knowing your worth and sharing your gifts.
Exactly. And you build confidence by doing things that affirm that sense of self-worth, especially things that scare you a little.
And that applies to pursuing your passions too. The book talks about how it often starts with a little nudge, an instinct, a curiosity.
Those things you can't stop thinking about. Maybe it's something you always wanted to try, or a career path that intrigues you.
And sometimes it's even about paying attention to what you envy in others, because that can be a clue to what you truly desire.
It might just be a little whisper at first, but the book encourages you to explore those whispers, to see where they lead. Like someone named Jo in the book, she took a pottery class just for fun and ended up making a complete career change.
That's amazing.
But sometimes pursuing our passions means going against what other people expect of us. The book tells the story about Todd, who really wanted to study physical education but felt pressured to go into law or business.
So relatable.
He was totally paralyzed by this fear of disappointing his parents. But the 5-second rule gave him the courage to finally withdraw from that program and pursue what he actually loved.
That's powerful. Sometimes the biggest obstacle is the fear of what other people will think.
The book has this beautiful quote from Paulo Coelho, the author of The Alchemist. He says, "True belief in yourself is the courage to push yourself forward."
Oh, love that.
And it connects back to that old story about the man who searches the world for treasure only to find it buried in his own backyard. It's a reminder that everything we need is often already inside us.
It's about listening to that inner voice, that intuition.
And having the courage to act on it. Like Paulo Coelho himself. When asked about the inspiration for The Alchemist, he said he didn't have a grand plan. He just knew he wanted to write about his soul.
And the book really emphasizes the power of having those courageous conversations in our relationship.
Yeah. Like with my dad. I got this text from him one day and I just knew something was wrong.
Oh.
I called him right away and it turned out he had a brain aneurysm. It was terrifying, but it made me think about my father-in-law who had died suddenly a few years earlier. I realized how important it is to say the things that matter, to ask the hard questions while we still have the chance.
Absolutely.
So when I was talking to my dad, I just blurted out, "Dad, are you scared?" And his answer was amazing. He said he wasn't scared, he was grateful, he had no regrets.
Wow.
It was like a weight lifted. And it made me realize there's no right time for these conversations, there's only now.
The book shares a story about Courtney, who used the 5-second rule to finally call her father, who she hadn't spoken to in years.
Taking action in our relationships can be scary, but it's often the most rewarding thing we can do.
It can lead to incredible healing and growth. Like Stephanie's story. She used the 5-second rule to make the really difficult decision to get a divorce. And even though it was painful, she said it was the moment she felt most alive.
And then there's Karen's story about her brother Josh, who lived his life to the fullest. Right before he passed away, he sent her this text that she still treasures. It's a reminder to never leave those important things unsaid.
Exactly. So to wrap things up, the 5-second rule is all about overcoming that initial hesitation, that voice in our heads that tells us to wait, to play it safe, to stay comfortable.
It's about separating our feelings from our actions. Because we can't always control how we feel, but we can always choose how we act.
And it's those small acts of courage, those 5-second decisions, that can lead to incredible transformations. Whether it's quitting a job that makes you miserable, starting that business you've been dreaming of, or simply saying hello to someone who catches your eye.
Yeah, there's always a chance you might fail. But the bigger risk is not trying at all. The book is full of examples of people who took those leaps of faith and created extraordinary lives.
Like Dan, who went back to school at 60. And Shirley, who decided to start living again after losing her husband. It's never too late.
So whatever you're facing right now, remember this. This is your life. It's not going to start over. You can't change the past, but you can absolutely change your future. And it all starts with that first 5-second decision.
When your heart speaks, honor it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and move.
Beautiful.
And just a final thought to leave you with, think about one area of your life we've been holding back. What's one small action you could take right now in the next 5 seconds to start moving towards what you truly want?